Hi everyone, it's Erin from the Provincial Farmhouse. In today's video, I've put together a collection of my top 5 milk paint projects from 2023. For my first project, I'm going to be using this little bookend kit that I found at the thrift store. These little curtain rod ends and also these sweet little birds that I got from Temu. We're going to be combining all these pieces together to create some lovely French country bookends. To secure the bookends together, I'm using Gorilla's super glue gel first. I've put a line of the glue along the area where I want the other piece to sit, and then I'm joining them together. While that glue dries, we're going to take some of Gorilla's super glue again, and I'm going to add a little bit to the top of our little curtain rod end there, and I'm going to attach the bird. Now I did start this and I found that it wasn't sticking quickly enough, so we're going to add some of that Gorilla super glue, but then we're also going to add some hot glue so that it will hold it in place straight away and hold it there while it's drying. So I'm going to repeat the same process for each of the little birds. I will use a baby wipe to tidy up any excess glue. To further secure the bookends, I'm using my nail gun and I'm going to put 2 nails into each of these pieces just to make sure that it's nice and secure. The nails had a few issues going all the way in to start off with, so I'm just using a hammer to tap them the rest of the way in. Next, I'm going to be adding some texture to our sweet little birds. I'm going to be mixing Dixie Belle's Sea Spray texture additive with chocolate chalk mineral paint. After stirring that really well together, I'm using a chip brush to dab and stipple the product all over the little bird and the little curtain end. Once we have that texture on there, these start to look a little bit more cohesive. Now, I decided to add this product to the birds before I glued them on because I felt like it would just be a little bit awkward and hard to get to all those different angles. So we're doing it before we attach them to the bookends themselves. Remember, you can find a full product list in the description below and most of these products on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Once both of the bird pieces are painted, I am moving on to the bookends themselves. I'm going to add the texture to the area where the bird is going to sit, the back and the other side of the bookends, but I'm not going to add the texture to the bottom of the bookends. I want to make sure that these will sit flat on a shelf, so I'm not going to worry about that. Once all of my pieces are completely dry, we need to attach the little bird pieces. So I'm going to add some of my Gorilla Super Glue Gel to the area around the rim there, and then I'm also going to use some hot glue, and I'm also going to build up a fair amount of hot glue in the center and then position it on the bookend where I want it to go. I'll repeat the same process for the other bookend. To make these pieces look a little bit more cohesive, I'm going to add some more of that sea spray mixture to the base where we joined our different pieces together. This is just going to help blend them together. Once my paint was dry, I got some of my vintage Laurel Fusion milk paint. I already had this mixed up, and I'm going to go over the top of my bookends. Now, I'm not going to be careful to get full coverage here. I'm happy for my brush to skip over that beautiful texture we created, but I'm going to paint 1 coat over the top of each of the bookends. And then I am going to do what I love to do, which is use a heat gun to speed up the drying process. That's going to give us some wonderful texture. So here you can see that I am coming in with my heat gun. I'm speeding up that drying process. It's going to get us some lovely texture. Now that my milk paint is dry, I'm going to use a baby wipe to go in and do a little bit of wet distressing. I'm just running the baby wipe over the top of the details on the birds. I'm going to run it over the top of the milk paint itself because the texture that we created with the sea spray underneath is going to peek through. It's going to give it a really authentic old world look. I'm going to repeat the process for both of the bookends. If you look at these pieces side by side, one with the wet distressing and one without, it really does make a big difference doing that technique. To seal my bookends, I'm using Dixie Belle's clear Best Dang wax. I'm just applying it with my brush. And once I have the coverage that I want, I'm going to use a microfiber cloth to buff back the excess. And here are our finished bookends. I love how these turned out. I think it's amazing that you can take completely separate pieces and really bring them together to create something beautiful using paint. Let me know what you think of these in the comments. Our last project today is this little white pot that I found, and I'm going to be adding another mold from AliExpress. I did some resin casting here and we're going to add it to the front of the pot. Now, if I want to be able to bend it to a round surface, I need to heat up my resin. So I'm using my heat gun to heat it up so that it will become pliable and I'll be able to shape it to the pot itself. So we're going to have the design sitting a little bit above the pot, and it's also going to then join up with the bottom. It is going to jut out a little bit, but I think we can definitely make it work. I'm using Gorilla Super Glue Gel and also some hot glue for that immediate adhesion, and I'm going to position it on the pot where I want it to go and hold it there until that glue takes hold. I'm also using my heat gun to keep the casting warm so that it will continue to be flexible while it gets glued down. I'm then using some of Dixie Belle's drop cloth chalk mineral paint over the top of the resin casting and over the rest of the pot. I did spray this before we started with Rust-Oleum's Clear Matte Sealer as our bonding primer here. Once that's dry, I'm going to use one of my favorite mixtures, chocolate chalk mineral paint mixed with Dixie Belle's Sea Spray texture additive. You can see I'm brushing it on, but then I'm also dabbing and stippling over the top of the product to get some texture. We are going to do a lot of layers here today again. I hope you guys aren't sick of these looks, but we're going to approach it in a little bit of a different way. So once my chocolate mixture is dry, I'm adding some sea spray to that drop cloth paint, stirring it well. You can see it is now nice and thick. And then I'm going to apply it over the pot, but I'm going to leave some of the areas of brown showing through. And I'm just going to work my way around until I have the mixture on the rest of the pot. At this stage, I did not add any product to the inside of the pot. I wanted to see if I could leave it just in case somebody wanted to put a real plant in it. Once this layer was completely dry, I grabbed some of Dixie Belle's Gloss Clear Coat and added one coat over the top. I want to be able to get some cracks and some texture. With our next step, we're going to be using milk paint, and by sealing the porous paint surface that we're going over the top, I'm more likely to get that kind of a finish, and also it will help me when it comes to wet distressing. I'm then going to grab Fusion's Sea Glass milk paint. I'm going to grab a capful of that and I'm going to put it into a container, and then I'm going to put equal amounts of water in and stir it really well. So you want equal parts milk paint and water. I'm stirring it really well, and then I am using actually a milk frother that I got from Temu, and I'm just mixing it up really well. I find that this thickens the paint. I really like this. It helps me get some texture, and it's always fun to have a bit of a play with techniques to see what you like. I'm then going to apply the milk paint. You can see that it is nice and thick, but I'm going to allow my brush to skip certain areas because remember, I still want some of that drop cloth to show underneath. I still want some of that chocolate mixture to show. We're just doing some layers. So I'm just going to add that mixture over the entire outside of the pot. To achieve the texture and cracks that we were talking about, I grabbed my heat gun and I'm speeding up the drying process. So I'm concentrating that heat in certain areas. This will allow that paint to crack. We won't get any chipping today, but we're still going to get a lot of fun texture. You can see here what we've managed to achieve. Now, to create a little bit of a subtle difference, next I added some of Fusion's Hotel Robe to my already mixed up sea glass mixture. I'm adding a little bit more water and then I'm going to stir it up, and I'm going to continue adding little bits of that Hotel Robe, that lovely white milk paint, to my sea glass mixture. I want to lighten it up just a little bit, and then I also use that milk frother again. So we're just going to have a subtle variation in blue tones. This is going to add to that aged effect. As I'm applying this one, I'm applying even less than before, and you can see I'm applying it horizontally and then I'm changing directions. And just like before, we're going to speed up that drying process to encourage some texture and some cracking. Here is how our pot is looking so far. You can see we've got some lovely texture, some tonal variation. I'm going to grab a wet wipe and I'm going to do some wet distressing. Because we have that gloss clear coat down, I'm only going to be going down to the sea spray and also the drop cloth mixture. I'm not going to get all the way back down to the resin. At this point, I decided that the white interior was too stark, it looked too new for the look we were going for, so I added some of our milk paint to the inside. Remember, I have primed this with Rust-Oleum's Clear Matte Sealer. We might get a few chips here and there, but that will just add to the aged effect. Next, I took some more of that drop cloth mixture and decided to add a little bit to that center oval there that we have. I wanted to add this so that it looked like there may have been some sort of a design in the center that's worn away over time. So I'm adding that, and then once that's dry, I'm going to come in with a little bit more of that sea glass and Hotel Robe mixture, and then I am going to do some wet distressing to pull that back just a little bit more. This is just adding to that aged old world effect. To seal our pot, I'm using Dixie Belle's Best Dang Wax in Clear, and I'm going to go over the outside of the pot and the interior. This is going to seal up that paint really well. Once I covered the whole pot with that wax, I then used a microfiber cloth to buff back the excess. To give this more of a weathered outdoor look, I'm going to use some of Dixie Belle's Dixie Dirt in charcoal. I'm applying it with a small little artist brush and then using a larger clean brush to help spread out and blend in that Dixie Dirt. So I'm just adding it to the areas where I feel like dirt would naturally accumulate. And then I'm also adding it to the bottom rim of the pot as well. I feel like the dirt would definitely accumulate there over time. If you don't have Dixie Dirt, you could use a dark wax to age this up, a glaze, or perhaps a paint wash. Finally, we're going to use some of Dixie Belle's Gold Gilding Wax. I'm just running my finger over the top of some of the raised areas. I'm just applying a little bit here. I don't want it to be too over the top. I want this to look like gold gilding that's worn away over time. And then I'm grabbing a wet wipe to further tone it back. I'm just wiping it back a little bit to just again make it look like it's faded and worn. And here's our finished French style pot. I love how this turned out. That beautiful casting and the milk paint really transformed what was a plain pot. Let me know what you think of this project in the comments. Our second project is this watering can that I picked up at IKEA. To prep this piece, I gave it a coat of Rust-Oleum's Clear Matte Sealer, and now I'm going to mix up some of my favorite paint, the Toasted Coconut Milk Paint by Fusion. I'm mixing 1 tablespoon to 1 tablespoon of water. I'm mixing it up with a little whisk this time, and then I'm going to give this watering can 1 coat of the milk paint before we move on to the next step. The Rust-Oleum Clear Matte Sealer is going to give this a little bit of tooth, something for that paint to stick to, because even though we are going for a bit more of a chippy weathered look here, I don't want all of that paint to flake off. I need to know that majority of it is going to stay and stick there. I also made this mixture a little bit thicker by adding just a tiny bit less water to the mixture. I just feel like that also helped with the paint sticking to this slick surface. I'm not going to paint the inside today, just the outside. I'm going to let this first coat dry completely naturally before I move on to the next step. So you can see here that I've already got a little bit of crackling happening in certain areas. Some of it has already flaked off just as I've been handling it. So it is looking good. It's not all coming off. As you can see, I can scratch the side there and it's not coming off, but we are starting to get a little bit of crackle, some signs of age. So we're headed in a good direction. So next I'm going to mix up my milk paint again, just to get it all mixed thoroughly in so that none of it's sort of settled to the bottom, and then I'm going to go in and do another full coat. On the areas where the paint flaked off, I did use a little bit more of a dabbing motion. I didn't want to disturb too much more of that paint, and I'm just going to work my way around until I've got full coverage. For this project, I really wanted that metal peeking underneath, but you could always layer some colors underneath your last coat of paint for a bit of a different aged effect. I just decided that I wanted that metal showing through. This is really something that you can customize and sort of experiment with. It's just up to whatever look you're trying to recreate. Now comes one of my favorite parts. I am not letting this dry naturally. I am using a heat gun to speed up the process. I am still moving my heat gun around quite a lot, but then I do focus on certain areas, and I'm loving the crackle that starts to appear as I'm working around. It didn't flake off a lot, which is good. We just wanted it in certain areas, but you'll see that some of the crackle is starting to form, and just because you see crackle doesn't mean that it's all going to flake off. It does just give you that really fun texture. So once my second coat is completely dry, you can see here the wonderful crackle that I've managed to achieve. It is looking so good. I love this look. I've got bits that are going to flake off. I've got some that aren't. This has just turned out really, really well. Next, I'm going to work my way around the watering can, just using my finger to see what paint I can disturb and help to flake off for that natural chippy look, especially around the water spout. I've noticed there is a bit of paint that's able to come off. So again, just working my way around and loosening any of the paint that's ready to go. I also found that using my IOD silicone blade really helped loosen some of that paint. I was able to pull off some more of the chippy paint there. You can see we've got a few nice big chips happening there. And then when I wasn't able to get any more of that paint to chip off, I did decide to come in with some sandpaper. I am only using a 220 grit sandpaper. I don't want to be too rough with it. So I'm going around the areas that would naturally age, like around the rim and the spout and the handle, and I'm just doing a little bit more distressing. If you've been watching me for a while, you know I do love to use Dixie Belle's patina paint. It gives a lovely rustic look. I'm coming in with the iron patina paint. I've just got a small artist brush that I'm applying that to the watering can. I'm focusing on areas where I think that that rust would naturally occur. So around the bottom of the watering can, anywhere that I think that that water would sort of fall and accumulate and cause rust. So I'm just adding that. Now ordinarily you would be doing one coat of this, letting it dry, and then coming in with a second coat of this before using the green activation spray. I just wanted to see how it would go with just one coat, and also I didn't mind if some of that iron patina paint color stayed. I just felt like it actually really went beautifully with the look that I was trying to achieve. If you don't have access to patina paint, maybe before you start painting with the milk paint, you could actually age your watering can in some vinegar. Maybe you could use paints or waxes to replicate the look. You don't have to use the exact products that I'm using today. While my patina paint is still wet, I'm using the green activation spray. I've poured a little bit in a container. I have a brand new brush and I am going to go around and dab that green activation product onto all of my wet paint. This is going to help start the rust process. The rust process can actually take several hours, so you just want to be a bit patient with this process. I've called it the green activation spray because it actually does come with a nozzle, and a lot of people do actually spray that product as opposed to dabbing it on with a brush, but I like to have more control and I don't want my whole watering can sprayed with that product. I want to be able to apply it to certain areas. So again, that will just be your personal preference and whatever look you're trying to achieve. I also decided to add a little bit of the leftover spray product to certain areas just to see how it would react to the metal that's already in the watering can. If you're worried about it actually rusting through and you really want to use this as a watering can, you can use Dixie Belle's Prime Start first. That is a priming product that stops that rust going any further than the surface area. Again, this is a decor item. I don't mind if this literally does get rusty and crusty. Once the patina has started to work its magic, I am coming in with some more of that milk paint. I just want to tidy up some of those areas. This is something I like to do. I like to layer my original paint back over the top. I like to stipple it and dab it. I think it just adds to the realism, and it also allows it to have more of a natural look instead of it looking like it's just got spots all over it. So again, this is just something that I like to do, and you can see I do actually cover up quite a lot of the product. I want it to be a very subtle look here, but again, it really is up to you and what look you're trying to achieve. So I can see that not all of the iron paint actually activated, and that's why they do say to do 2 coats. So if you really want it to be really rusty, you would make sure that you do those 2 coats. I'm not minding that dark of the iron patina paint underneath. I think it actually looks a little bit like maybe it was painted black at one point. So it's just all about building up those layers when you're trying to make something look vintage and weathered. I then came in with my heat gun again just to make sure that we were getting a little bit more of that crackle, just to help the extra layer of paint blend in with the look that we'd already achieved. Now I'm going to be using one of the designs from JRV's mini grain sack stencils. I'm using this design here. It has a lot of text, which I love, and I'm using very little paint. I have got that Umber Silk Mineral paint again. I'm dabbing off a lot of that excess. This was a little bit tricky. I probably would recommend that you use some sort of spray adhesive. I really had to hold it down a lot because of the circle that was cut out around the edge. But I'm going for a vintage look here, so I didn't think it was too bad if I did actually not get it perfect. Once that paint's dry, I'm coming in with some 220 grit sandpaper to distress the stencil design itself, and then sealing the entire jug with some clear Bestang wax. Okay, you guys know I could not stop there. I had to grab some of my brown Bestang wax, and I am adding it over the top of the jug, and I love how that product has sat down in the cracks that were formed by the milk paint. I think it just adds so much weathering, and I just love this look. So I'm going to apply the brown wax to the entire watering can, and obviously if it gets a little bit too dark in certain areas, I'm able to use that clear wax almost like an eraser, and I'm able to lighten the look right up. If you don't have this wax to use, you could always use a glaze or a paint wash, or if this is a little bit too much for you, you could leave this step out. And here's our finished watering can. I love how this turned out. I could definitely imagine this with some lovely flowers sitting inside. I think it now looks wonderfully aged and chippy and vintage. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. Our next project is this lovely wooden handmade wall planter. Well, at least that's what we're going to be using it as today. My first step is to take out my JV air dry clay, and I am working that into my IOD olive crest mold. We're going to be taking some of those olive laurels. We're going to be casting those. You can see that I'm working that clay in and using my thumb to push the clay out. Then I'm turning it over and gravity is helping me get that mold out. I'm going to be repeating the same process for the other side as well. When I'm doing shapes like these, I like to roll it out into a sausage sort of shape first, and then I press it down into the mold. It just makes it a little bit easier. Next, I'm going to be using IOD's bird song mold, and I'm adding some cornstarch to the little bird that I want to use. And again, I'm going to be working my clay into that design. You could use resin instead of clay if you find clay a little bit tricky to deal with. And again, I'm just pushing away with my thumb to get that excess clay out, and that micro rim is really helping me get a lovely line. And then you'll see that I flex the mold to help it release from there, and then I turn it over, and that I find is the easiest way to get your castings out. Finally, I'm then going to cast the sweet bow from the Laurel mold. I really love the scale of this bow. I feel like it goes perfectly with the olive laurels that we just cast. Once I have all my castings ready, I've positioned them on the front of our wall planter, and I'm using a little bit more clay to fill in the holes where the screws are. I feel like this sort of detracts from the piece, so we're going to fill those in. You won't even see them once I've painted this piece. Now I need to glue down my castings. I'm using a really strong wood glue, and I'm going to work with one casting at a time. So I've put a generous amount of glue on the back of my casting, and then I'm spreading it with my finger and then positioning it. I'm then moving on to the little bow and repeating the same process. Now I did feel like I wanted my bird to be facing a little bit more upwards, so I just have a little spatula. I gently lifted it up and then repositioned it. And then I'm going to add some glue to each of my laurels. I was definitely inspired with this piece by vintage mailboxes that you see that have the birds on them and the foliage. I sort of just wanted to play to that and include some of those elements. And now I am going to clean up all of that excess glue with a baby wipe. I want to give this piece some texture, so I'm putting some of Dixie Belle's Sea Spray texture additive into my chocolate chalk mineral paint. I'm stirring it well, and then I'm going to dab and stipple that mixture onto my piece using a chip brush. I know this is wood, but I wanted to give it more of an aged metal appearance, so this was definitely something that I felt would achieve that. This wood just looked so new and perfect. It didn't really fit with the look I was going for. Now my castings are still pretty fresh. I've only had them made for a couple of hours, so I'm being really gentle while I'm applying this, and I'm going to apply it to the whole piece except for the back. And then I'm going to let this dry completely overnight before my next step. This surface is pretty porous now, so I'm going to use some of Dixie Belle's Gloss Clear Coat to create a little bit of resist. This was suggested to me by one of my lovely subscribers, Amber, so thanks for that tip. Adding the clear coat is going to allow me to come back and sand and wet distress back just to our lovely chocolate color. Once that's dry, I'm mixing up some of Fusion's vintage Laurel milk paint. I'm going to put 1 capful into a container, and then I'm going to put the same amount of water into that and mix it well, so equal parts. I'm then going to apply a heavy, thick coat to my piece. I'm going to work in sections, and this is going to be one coat coverage. I'm going to work that paint into all of the details. I'm going to paint the entire piece with this, and I'm going to also speed up the drying process. Now, unfortunately, I did not get the cracking that I was after doing this. I may have to add the clear coat and also the wax perhaps to get this. This was just such a porous surface, so the milk paint stuck really well. The gloss clear coat, however, will still help me with wiping back and wet distressing. I really love vintage Laurel. It's such a beautiful blue-green tone, and once you add wax to it, it definitely does have more of a blue tone to it. Let me know in the comments if you have used this color before. Once my paint had completely dried, I grabbed some 220 grit sandpaper and did a little bit of light distressing. I wasn't really getting what I was after, so I did grab a wet wipe and I started to do some wet distressing instead. And you can see that in the places where I applied the gloss clear coat, I'm able to wipe back my milk paint to the chocolate color, and you'll see shortly that it looks absolutely beautiful on the rest of the piece as well, and it definitely actually gives a bit of a worn metal look as I'm rubbing over the top of the texture created by the sea spray. It definitely reminds me of worn old metal. If the distressed and worn look isn't for you, remember you could just leave this part out. Next, I'm going to be sealing the entire piece with Dixie Belle's Best Dang Wax in Clear. I'm applying it gently with my Best Dang brush and working it into that porous paint. In the areas that are a little bit trickier to get to, I will switch to a smaller brush, and then I'm going to be buffing back the excess with a microfiber cloth. I'm also going to use this cloth to help me get down inside of our little planter box. Next, I'm going to be using some of Dixie Belle's Best Dang Wax in white. I have a little chip brush and I'm applying it over the entire piece and then wiping back some of the excess. This to me again adds to that worn feel, and it also looks a little bit oxidized. If you wanted to give this even more of an aged look, you could use a brown wax or a black wax instead of the white wax. Finally, so that we can hang this up, I'm going to attach some of this ribbon that I got from Temu. I've just pushed some through the holes that were already there. I'm then going to tie a knot, and I'm going to then repeat the same process on the other side. Now, you don't have to do this. You could definitely attach a metal hanger on the back. I just felt like this was a nice touch. And here's our finished wall planter. I'm really happy with how this turned out. It was a very plain box before, but a great blank canvas. Let me know what you think of this in the comments. I'm going to be using this little wooden birdhouse that I picked up from a craft website, and also a candle stick that I had lying around the shop. We're going to combine the two of them. As this is not going to be a hanging birdhouse, I am going to remove the little rope that they had attached from the top. I've cut it. I'm then poking it through the little hole and getting out the excess rope through the hole in the front. My next step is to add a little bit of hot glue to my baubles mold. This is actually a Christmas mold. We're going to be using part of one of the bauble designs, so I'm adding a little bit of hot glue to the section where I want to stop my resin from continuing. Next, I'm going to mix up my resin. I'm using a fast cast resin. I'm pouring part A out into a container, part B out into another container, and then you combine them and stir for about 30 seconds. I'm then going to be pouring them into a few different molds that I'm going to be using today. I don't necessarily have to use resin for all of the molds for this birdhouse, but I wasn't sure exactly which molds were going to be glued directly onto the birdhouse and which needed that extra bit of stability to stand on their own. So I'm going to pour out all of my resin and it will take about 10 minutes to cure. Once my castings were ready, I started taking them out of the molds, and I'm going to be having a bit of a play here. I know that I wanted to add some extra details to the front of the birdhouse. I would love to have some of the details sort of hanging over the edges. That's another reason why I used resin, so that it would have that support. And here I've decided I'm going to place this little element from the Swags mold into the little hole up the top. So to attach that, I'm going to be using hot glue, but I'm also going to be using some Gorilla Super Glue. So together they're going to be enough to hold my little casting in place. The hot glue is also going to fill in a little bit of that gap too. After I'm finished gluing the piece into place, I'm going to carefully clean up any excess glue. Now I need to attach the sections to the front. These are from the Dainty Flourishes mold. I'm going to use some Gorilla Super Glue gel and I'm going to attach that to the front. This sets pretty quickly, so I'm just manipulating it into place. These are still pretty fresh, so I can bend them and manipulate them pretty easily. If you're working with your castings that have been set for a while, you can make them a bit more pliable by heating them up with a hairdryer or a heat gun. Next, I'm going to be attaching another element from the Dainty Flourishes mold to my birdhouse using that same super glue. I'm just going to position it up the top of the little hole in the front of the birdhouse. Next, I'm going to use a piece from the Classic Elements mold. I'm heating it up with my heat gun because it has cooled down since I've taken it out of the mold. So I've heated it up so that it's pliable again, and I'm going to bend and manipulate it into the shape that I want. I need to curve it around so that it will fit on the front of my birdhouse. I'm then going to use that same Gorilla Super Glue and also the hot glue so that it will be held in place straight away so that it will maintain the shape that I've manipulated it into. Now I could have cast these molds using clay as they're going directly onto a surface to support them, but I wasn't sure exactly what ones I wanted to use, so I just cast them all in resin. I'm also going to attach another piece from the Dainty Flourishes mold underneath the little entrance to the birdhouse. I felt like these just sort of tied well together. Next, I'm going to be trimming off a little bit of the piece that I made out of the baubles mold. I decided that I wanted to trim a bit off the top and sort of mold and shape the top of it into a more rounded surface. So you can see I'm going to position it up the top, and then I'm using a bit of sandpaper to actually round that resin a little bit. You can do this to get the shape that you want. I'm then going to use a combination of hot glue and also the super glue to attach that. Because this is hanging down, it doesn't have as much support. I want to give it extra glue to keep it in place. Next, I'm going to be mixing up some of Dixie Belle's chocolate chalk mineral paint with the Sea Spray texture additive. I've added 2 spoons of the chocolate chalk mineral paint, and I'm just going to slowly add the Sea Spray to the mixture until I'm happy with the consistency. Then I'm going to use a chip brush to dab and stipple the Sea Spray mixture onto my birdhouse. This is going to create some great texture that's going to go underneath our final coat of paint. I want this to have a vintage, rustic, worn feel, and to create that look, you need to think about the layers of your paint and how being outside might weather that paint. So I'm imagining that over time our top coat's worn away and some of that bottom coat, the Sea Spray mixture is going to show through. It's definitely something that will add to that more authentic look if that's the look that you're going for. Once my paint has completely dried, I'm going to take a small little candle and I'm going to rub wax over the areas where I want to be able to distress back my paint. This is going to help make it so that when I'm distressing, it will just distress down to the brown Sea Spray mixture that we've put on there. I'm then going to be using Fusion's Hotel Robe milk paint. I'm going to be taking a capful of the milk paint powder and putting that into a container, and then I'm going to take the same amount of water and add to the mixture. So you want to do equal parts here. If you want your mixture to be a little bit thicker, you would do a little bit less water. I'm then going to stir this really well. I don't mind if my milk paint isn't mixed perfectly, but if you do mind, I would use an immersion blender. I'm now going to start adding my milk paint. I'm using a natural bristle brush to apply my milk paint, and I'm putting it on very thick. I want this to be a one coat coverage because I don't want to disturb the wax that we've put on there. If you fuss over that too much, that wax is not going to do what we want it to do. So I'm going to put that milk paint over the top of the front section first. I'm going to be working in sections here because if you've watched me for a little while, you know that I like to speed up the drying process to achieve that wonderful cracking and chipping look, and that's definitely going to go with our project today. Once I have the coverage that I want, I'm going to get my heat gun out and I'm going to speed up that drying process. I've got that paint on quite thick, so we're going to have quite a bit of texture. And in speeding up that drying process, I am going to get a few cracks and chips here and there, but ultimately the distressed look is going to come from when this is all dry and I come in with some sandpaper or I do a bit of wet distressing. So I'm going to move on to the roof now, and again, I'm going to do it in sections because I want to speed up that drying process. I don't want it to dry naturally because I'm less likely to get the cracks and the chipping that I want. As I'm painting, I'm not being super careful to get full coverage. I don't mind if there's some areas that my paint misses because again, this is going to add to that vintage look and it will also make it look like it's chipped paint, which is exactly what we're going for. So I don't need full coverage when I'm doing this. If you don't have milk paint, you could definitely still do this sort of a look. You can miss more of the paint like I have here and miss different sections so that your sea spray mixture shows through, or you could use a crackle medium underneath whatever paint you're using instead. So just a reminder that you can find a full product list in the description of this video below, and you can find most of these products on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Once my paint has completely dried, I'm going to come in with a wet wipe and I'm going to do a little bit of wet distressing. You can distress milk paint back with this because it can be reactivated with water. It's a gentler way to do your distressing. So I'm going to start off with this, and you can see that I am rubbing over the top of the castings, paying particular attention to the details. I really want to bring those out and highlight those. So I'm going to work my way around and use that wet wipe to do some distressing. And then I'm going to be also grabbing some 220 grit sandpaper shortly, and I'm going to be using that to pay particular attention to the rest of the birdhouse, because in doing that, I'm going to be able to bring out a lot of that texture. I'm going to be able to pull back some of that milk paint so that the chocolate paint shows through. Now I need to work on the candlestick that's going to be the pedestal for our birdhouse to sit on. I'm going to be repeating the same steps that I did with the birdhouse. I'm applying that sea spray mixture to the entire candlestick. This is going to create that wonderful texture to give this more of a vintage look. Once my paint has completely dried, I'll come in with that candle again, hitting a lot of the edges and some of the other areas where I want my milk paint to be able to be distressed back. I'll then come in with that Hotel Robe Fusion milk paint again, and I'm applying it very heavily. And again, you can see that I am not being careful to get full coverage. I am happy for some of that chocolate sea spray mixture to show through. Once I have the coverage that I want, I will do exactly what I did before and use my heat gun to speed up that drying process. We're probably going to get some lovely cracks here because of how thick the paint went on. I'm then going to use a wet wipe to wipe off the excess paint from around the rim. I don't want anything going between our glue and the birdhouse, and I'm also going to lightly distress the candlestick for a vintage feel. Before I put my two pieces together, I'm going to seal both of the items with Dixie Belle's Best Stang Wax in clear. I'll then buff off the excess with a microfiber cloth. I'm not using any antiquing wax today. I don't want to dull that beautiful white that we have from the Hotel Robe milk paint, but if you want more of an antiqued look, you could definitely come in with a brown wax, maybe some Dixie dirt. I was just happy with this as it was. Now I need to attach my two pieces, so I'm going to be using that same Gorilla Super Glue again. I'm going to add a generous amount around the edge where I'm going to be sticking it to the birdhouse, and I'm also going to use some hot glue. This will be enough because my birdhouse is very light and this is just a decor piece. So once I have my glue there, I'm going to turn the birdhouse upside down so that I can see where the center is and press down firmly. This is going to stick pretty quickly because I have that hot glue, and my super glue dries pretty quick too. Once my birdhouse is completely stuck down, I'm going to take that Hotel Robe milk paint and paint the bottom. You definitely want to do this because it's sitting up a bit high, you'll be able to see the base and it will feel like a more finished product. I'm also going to paint the bottom of the candlestick as well. And here's our finished French Country birdhouse. I'm so happy with how this turned out. I've been wanting to do this project for a while, and those IOD molds have really taken what was a very plain birdhouse into something that looks beautifully French country. Let me know in the comments what you think of today's project. If you enjoyed today's video, I would really appreciate it if you would hit that like button, comment, and share it out to a friend that you think might enjoy it. I hope that you enjoyed today's video collection, and if you haven't already, I would love it if you would hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so that you don't miss out on any of our videos. You can find the products used today on our website, theprovincialfarmhouse.com.au. Thanks for watching.